On behalf of Washington University in St. Louis,
The Ohio State University,
Bloomberg Philanthropies,
HBCU Climate Change Consortium,
the City of St. Louis,
City of Columbia, Missouri,
Second Nature,
the College of Menominee Nation,
University of Wisconsin in Madison,
the University of Michigan,
USDN, Urban Sustainability Directors Network,
the University of Minnesota,
Indiana University.
Welcome to the Midwest Climate Summit. For more than a century, the Midwest has fed our nation and manufactured our goods,
leading to unprecedented growth and prosperity. But today, we face a great challenge.
The Midwest is already feeling the impacts of a changing climate. We are experiencing increased seasonal flooding, droughts, and heat waves.
And we're seeing a greater number of extreme weather events. All of this puts lives at risk, and it destroys crops, it strains infrastructure, and it burdens the economy.
We invite you to participate in the Midwest Climate Summit today and in the months ahead
as we come together to develop a coordinated Midwest response to the climate crisis.
The next decade is critical to avoid the worst impacts of a changing climate.
And the Midwest is uniquely positioned to develop solutions given our strengths across many sectors.
In fact, our leadership will create jobs, improve health, make our communities more resilient to natural disasters, protect our cherished natural resources,
and position the Midwest to attract top talent and major employers in the coming years.
This work can be done and must be done in a manner that creates opportunities for all of our communities, rural, suburban, and urban.
especially those that have been left behind even as the overall economy has expanded.
This critical work is going to require leadership from all sectors and all communities throughout the Midwest.
Thank you for joining us. We are energized by the talent and the expertise that is coming together, and we look forward to the great things we will accomplish for our future. Now, let's get started.
Now let's get started.
Good morning, and welcome to the third session of the Midwest Climate Summit Fall Series. My name is Phil Valco, and I'm serving as the MC throughout the series. If you're joining us for the first time today, welcome. If you've been able to participate in one or both of the first two sessions, welcome back. It's great to have everybody here with us this morning. We have an incredible program today that begins with a keynote panel on ambition, economics, and a just transition in the Midwest, featuring Carla Frisch from Rocky Mountain Institute, Delmar Gillis from Elevate Energy, and Neal Hawkins from the Herb Family Foundation. Following the keynote panel, we have 4 concurrent workshops that feature over a dozen additional leaders and experts. If you haven't signed up for the workshops, but you would like to participate, you're still able to do so. Visit the event details page on the Midwest Climate Summit website to see the workshop topics, and visit the speaker lineup page to see the incredible group of speakers who will be part of the workshops. As we get started, I'd like to again acknowledge and thank the steering committee organizations and individuals who've contributed truly a tremendous amount of time and expertise to make the Midwest Climate Summit possible. We're here today thanks to a really remarkable collaboration between over 20 organizations and over 50 individuals. I encourage you to visit the website to learn more about the partner organizations and the planning committee members. And thanks to the generous support from Bloomberg Philanthropies, we're able to offer the fall series at no cost. As I shared during the last session, the keynote and workshop sessions throughout the fall have been thoughtfully planned to follow an arc, with each complementing and building on the previous sessions. The content was developed with a specific eye towards building new and enduring partnerships throughout the Midwest and advancing a set of objectives for each of the 4 workshop tracks. We encourage you to attend and actively participate in as many of the sessions this fall as you are able. But don't worry if you've missed previous sessions. Past sessions are now posted on the website, and you can view them at any time. Your engagement, your perspective, and your expertise is invaluable, whether you've been able to participate in all sessions or you're only able to sporadically attend. We want the fall series to serve as an on-ramp for additional individuals and organizations to join our collaborative effort to develop a more coordinated Midwestern response to the climate crisis. And so, please help us spread the word about this series by sharing it in your networks. This is our third session, and we have 2 additional sessions in the series. And now, as we've done before, we're going to start with a couple of audience polls. You'll see the poll question in the box below your video viewer. If you haven't done so yet, you'll need to enter your name and email address first, and then the poll question will pop up. And if you're viewing in full screen mode, you'll need to exit full screen mode to answer the poll questions. Now, both questions today are asking for your opinion. If you don't know, please take your best guess. So the first question is, which sector of the Midwestern economy is likely to experience the greatest economic cost as a result of the changing climate? Take a moment to fill it out, and we'll see the poll results show up in just a moment. I'm not seeing any poll responses coming in. Let's see if we can maybe refresh. Oh, there we go. All right. Wow, we have an overwhelming majority of responses voting for agriculture, forestry, and fishing, with a second place, but not a close second, for utility services, electric, gas, and water. And then really just a smaller number of votes for the others. Excellent. Well, thanks everyone for filling that one out. So now the next question we'll pose to you is a complement to the first question. Which sector of the Midwestern economy is likely to experience the greatest economic benefit of climate action? So take a moment to review the answers. It's the same options, and we're asking you again in this case to think about the greatest economic benefit of climate action. And again, if you don't know, please take your best guess. And it'll take a moment here for the results to come in. There we go. Very interesting. So as you all are seeing, we have agriculture, forestry, and fishing was our number 1 for the last question. Now it appears that utility services is the number 1, with agriculture, forestry, and fishing as a relatively close second. And then similarly, a smattering of votes for the additional sectors. Excellent. Well, thank you all for filling out the poll. Our speakers today will have an opportunity to talk a little bit about some of those issues, and hopefully we'll be able to dive in more deeply within the workshops. Now, it's my honor to introduce Carla Frisch, who will lead our keynote panel. Carla is a senior principal at Rocky Mountain Institute, where she leads the U.S. program. She works on America's Pledge, which brings together private and public sector leaders to ensure the United States remains a global leader in reducing emissions and delivers the country's ambitious climate goals of the Paris Agreement. Carla has testified in Congress about the importance of local climate leaders, and she spoke about the topic this past Tuesday on NPR's Morning Edition. So I encourage you to go check that out as well. Carla, we're thrilled to have you with us today, so I'll turn it over to you. Take it away.
Thanks so much, and I'm thrilled to be here. And it's so amazing to see the breadth and depth of organizations working on these topics and building a sustainable future in the Midwest. Today, we're talking about ambition, economics, and a just transition in the Midwest, topics that are inextricably interrelated. And I want to start with some scene setting, particularly on the ambition front. So the basics are, at this point, no states in the Midwest are on track to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in line with limiting warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. That means consistent with the science, limiting the worst impacts of warming, and building a sustainable economy. And at the same time, there's been amazing progress. What really struck me is during the heart of the COVID pandemic, Kansas City committed to carbon neutrality. They saw the link between health, climate, and economics. And I've heard tales of places like Cincinnati furloughing sustainability workers, then realizing those workers were essential to city operations, in particular to follow through on getting cheaper renewables online and lowering costs for the city. So particularly in the Midwest, we see this leadership coming from cities, coming from state leaders, coming from universities and colleges, also communities of faith, cultural institutions. And across the US, those entities committed to climate action make up almost 70% of GDP. That's globally significant. Now, building on those actions, we see three common themes in the literature about what it will take to decarbonize the Midwest and have a just transition. So those are, number one, continuing to move toward clean electricity. Now, since 2005, electricity emissions in the Midwest have come down about 30%, which is really great. To continue that trend, there's work to be done. So we need to work to retire all of the remaining coal plants. That's more than 100 in the Midwest. Some of those retirements are underway, but some have yet to be started. We need to work to prevent new gas plants from coming online where they're not needed. Many are planned for build out in the next decade. And we need to increase renewable energy and build out solar and wind faster than gas was built in the early 2000s, faster than nuclear was built in the 70s. Now, Iowa and Minnesota in particular have been global leaders on this front, setting the pace for the trend that will continue. Now, second is using that clean energy efficiently, of course, in our buildings, in our transportation, and in our industry. So on the buildings front, the electricity mix is already clean enough. It's getting cleaner and cleaner and projected to get cleaner, but it's already clean enough that using electricity instead of gas for HVAC, for heating and cooling, and for appliances is usually cleaner and usually cheaper. So cleaner from a greenhouse gas perspective and also from an indoor air quality perspective, which is particularly important during COVID and for underserved communities that are plagued with respiratory illnesses like asthma. So what does that mean? It means building all new buildings, all electric and highly efficient. And at the end of life for existing HVAC and appliances that are powered by gas, to roll those over to electric and highly efficient. Now, in the Midwest, emissions are dominated by transportation and industry. And on transportation, first, we look at how we're moving goods and people and what are the strategies we can implement to reduce vehicle miles traveled. And then, with what's left, shift to all electric where possible. So current light-duty electric sales in the Midwest are about 1%. That's good news because it's doubled. And what we need to do going forward is build to a point by 2030 that 70 to 100% of new car sales are electric. And to support those sales targets and make sure they're accessible to everyone, we need to increase the number of public chargers 20-fold over the next decade. Now, of course, as was highlighted, the Midwest is a US and global leader in industry. So there's amazing opportunities here to double down on efficiency and electrification. And not just marginal improvements, but a major strategic shift in the region to capture the opportunities of the energy transition and build a future based on those clean energy jobs and investment. And then the third and final strategy is optimizing land use. So this is what you all were highlighting in the poll as both an opportunity for benefits and a place that will feel costs. So what this is about is the way we manage our farms, our forests, and our wetlands, managing them to sequester carbon dioxide at the same time as providing productive and restorative uses. And who better than the Midwest to set that trend on sustainable agriculture and share those opportunities with the rest of the world. So we've made amazing progress with a lot more to do. And a key question is, how can we make this transition in a way that will reap benefits for everyone? So with that, and to answer that question, I will transition to our next speaker, Delmar Gillis. Delmar is the Chief Operating Officer of Elevate Energy, located in Chicago. He's responsible for implementing operations, workforce development, and project management in support of Elevate Energy. Now, Elevate Energy has a growing portfolio of clean energy projects. They have a diverse set of energy efficiency and a growing renewable energy programs. And Mr. Gillis leads their core operational functions. He also works on business development, program design, and project coordination. He's extremely thoughtful, and you all are in for a treat today. So with that, I give you Delmar Gillis.
Thank you, Carla, and thank you, Washington University. I'm really honored and very excited to be a part of today's conversation. As Carla mentioned, at Elevate Energy, we really take a strong focus on ensuring everyone has access to the clean energy economy, and this conversation is important. One of the areas that I really want to focus on today is thinking through the role that people and workers have in this new clean energy economy that is growing across the Midwest. Oftentimes, communities of color, women-run businesses, and community organizations are often trying to understand and find out how they fit into this new growing economy. With all of the innovation that's taking place, with all the changes that we're seeing day in and day out related to the clean energy economy, oftentimes they feel like things are moving at a pace and in a way that is not inclusive. One of the areas of focus of my work is finding win-win solutions as we move forward and have these types of conversations. Specifically, what are we doing to ensure that Black and Brown communities are engaged in the process of determining what is best for their communities and what is best for the workers from those communities? What are we doing to engage contractors? Oftentimes, when you look at clean energy projects, you don't see women-run and owned businesses being engaged. What do we need to do to make sure they have a seat at the table at the early stages of these programs? What do we need to do legislatively and through our regulatory process to ensure that there's equity, access, and inclusion in our policies? There's a lot of work to be done, but there's also a lot of really good case studies out there of how to do this. Also, what's important is the interconnectivity of all of these processes. If you have workers without jobs, or if you have opportunities without ways of engaging communities of color, oftentimes you see a very disjointed approach. So as we look at some of the solutions that Carla highlighted earlier, we need to make sure that we are interconnecting those with our communities, with our diverse contractors, and with those that are coming up with these new innovations. So as I mentioned, I am very excited today to be a part of this conversation. I'm looking forward to discussing the engagement of communities of color and best practices around how we can transition to a clean energy economy. And once again, I'm very thankful to Washington University and the Midwest Climate Summit for having this opportunity to participate in this conversation. Thank you again, Carla.
Thank you. And now I'm very pleased to introduce Dr. Neal Hawkins. He is president of the Fred A. and Barbara M. Erb Family Foundation, which is dedicated to advancing an environmentally healthy and culturally vibrant metropolitan Detroit and a flourishing Great Lakes ecosystem. Prior to his appointment, he served at Dow, retiring as the corporate vice president of environment, health, and safety. And also, he was the chief sustainability officer. He serves on many boards, does many things. And fascinating to me, he's part of the International Olympics Committee Sustainability Commission. Dr. Hawkins has been thinking a lot about the power of the Midwest economy. So looking forward to hearing from him, and over to you, Dr. Hawkins.
Well, thank you very much for having me today and for that introduction. As Carla said, 31 years at Dow and now almost 2 years at the Herb Family Foundation, I approach these kind of challenges with my past also in mind, which is business. And how do you bring business to the table to actually help deliver faster results? How do you accelerate progress? I've been working on climate change for at least 25 years in my career, and I've been working on Great Lakes for almost as long. But one thing I want to bring focus in on one part of the Midwest, which is the Great Lakes. I think that it's a very unique area. It's for the whole planet, and it's also a microcosm for the challenge we face. People in the Great Lakes don't tend to think of it as an integrated economy or ecosystem. It crosses 2 countries, 2 provinces, 8 states, if you're counting also the St. Lawrence Seaway. And that dividedness, especially the binational one, impedes, I believe, joint understanding and joint decision making, which could be an accelerator if used properly. I want to give you a few facts. There's really no hydrogeological region in the Midwest or the world that is as unique and as important as this is. In terms of water, it's the world's largest freshwater system, 20% of the world's freshwater. And keep in mind, 99% of the water on the planet is not freshwater. So 20% of the 1% of freshwater in the world is in the Midwest. There are 10,000 miles of shoreline, so 40% of the Earth's circumference. You'd cover all of North America with 1.5 meters of water if you drained the Great Lakes and could do that. 35,000 islands. 1/3 of all Canadians get their drinking water there, 1/7 of Americans. Many, many species, thousands of species. And the boundaries of the Great Lakes are really defined by geology and hydrology, not by the governments. From outer space, you would look at it and not understand that there are these governmental differences. Now, from an economic point of view, if this region, the Great Lakes region, were its own country, it would be the 3rd largest economy in the world. That's a pretty astounding fact. You often hear people refer to California and how big it is. This is a huge, huge economy when you combine this whole region. Agriculture is enormous. Shipping is huge. Industrial production, the world's largest freshwater fishery. And just to make the point about economy, there are more trade dollars going across 4 bridges between Canada and the US than all the trade between the US and Japan. Now, this area has huge environmental stressors. I'm not going to get into all of them, but climate change is clearly the biggest one. We have increasing lake levels, flooded agricultural fields, flooded cities, flooded neighborhoods all over the region, new temperature extremes, altered seasons, erosions of lakefronts are destroying roads and homes. And also, so that's right here in this region. The climate change impacts on the whole country are going to drive millions of people to this region. So it's not a static population or economic picture. It will be changing. There will also be a lot of pressure to divert water to drought regions and other parts of the country. Now, given this incredible ecological and economic intersection, there really is hardly any economic forecasting and modeling that's integrated intricately with ecology and forecasting of ecology. Canadians do theirs, the Americans do theirs, but regionally not that much. And I believe if we want to make faster progress on necessary and urgent energy transitions, agricultural transitions, infrastructure transitions, shelter transitions, transit transitions, we really need to get serious about economic and ecological forecasting and modeling of the Great Lakes region. I think there's a lot of bipartisan support for the Great Lakes. People understand them. They feel tied to water. This is their home. But they don't really understand what climate change is going to do. And I'm not talking just about laundry lists of impacts, but how can you forecast it out, the timelines, and really make a plan for how to transition to where you want to land. The Herb Family Foundation is funding a start to this in a dialogue that the University of Michigan will be bringing together the economics department primarily, but they're going to do this binationally. And anybody watching, if you have interest, send me a note and we can get you linked to the right people. But I believe that having this kind of integrated economic and ecologic information will bring private sector, government, and citizens in closer into a debate, a public policy debate, so that we can really get at what we need to do to thoughtfully make these transitions. I think we need to do this so we can go faster in the transitions. I think economic arguments will bring more stakeholders to the table. And, we've known about climate change for a long time, and we sort of know, and you saw the guessing we were all doing at the beginning about the impacts. I think we need to move away from guessing to knowing, and knowing how it will impact the economy. I think the Great Lakes, because it's a unique region, is a great place to focus that kind of attention and try to drive much accelerated progress. Thank you.
Thank you. And some great stats to add to the compilation that the Midwest Climate Conference has been putting together about the power of the Midwest and the opportunity for change and growth. So there's so many things that we could talk about here. Delmar, I'm going to turn to you first. And I had the opportunity to get to know you a little bit and understand you've had a very interesting set of career experiences. And as you think about the intersection of ambition, economics, and a just transition, how have you seen the discussion evolve? And where is your own thinking emerging as that discussion is evolving?
Thanks, Carla. Very good question. Honestly, I think the conversation is continuing to evolve. And what I've really been intrigued by is this intersectionality between environmental justice, social justice, and how we're looking at innovation and what the future looks like. The unfortunate killing of George Floyd has really brought a lot of energy into communities and have really caused people to step back, not just from a social justice perspective, but also from an environmental justice perspective. And so you tend to have deeper and richer conversations around the environment. Historically, oftentimes groups would get together, they would come up with some solutions, and then they would say, I wonder what these community groups would think about XYZ. And then equity was often an add-on or an addition to the solution that was already derived. Now what you're starting to see is that equity is being brought to the forefront of the conversation, because I always like to say we're all drinking the same water and breathing the same air. So if there are environmental issues that are impacting air in a Black or Brown community, that air is also going to be in a more affluent communities. And so we have to look at these problems collectively and as a group and come up with solutions. So I would say one of the things that I'm really seeing, Carla, is let's get people together, let's have these conversations, and people aren't as afraid as they used to be of talking about equity, access, inclusion, and job creation among diverse contractors and partners, and having them at the table as part of these discussions.
Thank you. Great points there. And Neal, over to you. I mean, you've been thinking from the philanthropic perspective about the public good, about how we can move along. How have you seen the discussion change, and how has your own thinking emerged?
Yeah, I think that the real challenge here is there are immediate current problems that people are dealing with, and I know Detroit best. And if you look at Detroit, we've got flooding. I mean, like real flooding in neighborhoods. In the environmental justice area, my foundation also funds lead, blood lead work, as well as asthma work. So people are dealing with real life, right now problems. Climate change, to people facing those challenges, an ethereal future thing. And even though some of the flooding, I'm sure, is impacted by climate change already, they're just worried about stopping the flooding right now. So I think there's a need to work on the here and now, but do that in a way that also leads to thoughtful transitions. People are very engaged. They know that things need to change, but they don't necessarily know how to change them. And I just think we need to increase dialogue and get more stakeholders.
Right. So those real life problems that people are experiencing right now from climate change and interconnected issues. So on that front, we have some questions coming in from the audience. And thank you, Frederica, for this question for Delmar. Do you have examples of case studies for interconnectedness with Black and Brown communities?
Great question. I think one of the big areas that is particularly important is around job creation. In the solar industry especially, there is a desire by communities of color to be engaged in the job creation. And if you look at previous innovations, anything from cable television to the internet to cell phones, you often see this lag where Black and Brown communities, especially in urban environments, are not getting access to those resources. And you're seeing even some of that now with the COVID pandemic, as students, say, in Chicago public schools and other public school systems may not have the same level of resources to bring to bear that maybe other students have. And so part of the conversation around this interconnectivity is, I know a particular provider in the Chicago land area that's doing solar work that had over 100 jobs posted in the Chicagoland area. And the question around how do we connect up the community outreach, where we know that in many cities, the unemployment rate for Black and Brown workers is up to 50% higher than the rest of the population. How do you go from that unemployment rate to a training program to connect up with the jobs that are available, and then also focus on the retention, because that becomes an economic engine. And what I've seen is if you create a training program that just is churning people through it, and then you don't focus on the job placement and the retention, then you don't get the result. So if you look at it holistically and say we need to focus on recruiting, the training, the job placement, and then also provide the support services that are necessary, you quickly see that a 10 to 12 week job training program turns into an economic development engine that then starts to alleviate a lot of the other challenges in the community. So that's kind of a real world job-based example of interconnectivity. And there's several other examples that I'm happy to discuss as we go through the conversation.
Well, thank you. And that holistic approach seems to be a common theme and one that deserves more attention. So, Neal, we have an incoming question from Ina for you. How do we convince large companies to take a more holistic view of success outside of profit motives? So that theme of a holistic view, but from the company perspective.
Yeah, I think that pursuing companies to do things that are not in their interest in the long term is not a winning strategy. I think the winning strategy is find a way to make the case and the argument that it's in their interest to proactively engage on climate, proactively engage on climate transitions. And I'm jumping there because I think this notion that companies will act on philanthropic or humanitarian bases alone, it just doesn't work. But that doesn't mean that you can't have tremendous coalitions built with companies to make change. It's just if you're talking to Ford Motor Company, you have to help them see a future in electric vehicles, but not tell them we're trying to put you out of business. Okay, you got to find the path. If you're talking to Detroit Edison, you need to have a path that makes sense for Detroit Edison to bring them to the table. And I think that in climate, it's such a huge problem. If you go back to what Delmar was talking about, and dispersed energy production, solar, etc., on homes, you really need a thoughtful shelter policy as a country, as a city, as a region. And part of that is how do you build that shelter and how do you energize it and have the utilities support the diffused energy grid that everybody needs and move in a direction together. But I don't think we're having, Carla, enough discussions with all the stakeholders to to accelerate. And I think coming out of this election, don't care who wins on this point, I think coming out of this election, we have got to really change. We've got to get back to having a public policy debate around objectives that we as a society are trying to move towards. And that's been missing for quite a while. It's been missing for a decade. I mean, we really need to get back to talking about integrated policy and how can we push all the levers together to actually achieve something.
Thank you for that. Yeah, and that role of public discourse, very important in all of these topics. So one question that we've had coming in, and I think has been a theme of the Midwest Climate Conference to date, is, of course, corporates and governments have quite a bit of responsibility and opportunity on the climate front. But what about individuals, small organizations, medium-sized organizations, individuals? How would you all counsel individuals or organizations if they want to do more on climate? What would you recommend? So I'll start with Neal for a brief answer and then go to Delmar.
Okay. Yeah, I think that the advice I would give to an individual or a small organization is one, read up on the regional impacts. So be very familiar with that. Demand mainstream media cover climate change and climate impacts. The environmental reporting in this region is getting more and more reduced. And I think we as users of media need to demand more coverage, got to push legislators. But I think asking local government companies, farmers, just engaging in dialogue, be a happy warrior, not a negative warrior, a happy warrior that wants to ask questions and see where people stand on climate and climate transitions and listen. But we're not getting enough dialogue, Carla. And I think as individuals, if we can help promote civil dialogue, we're going to accelerate progress.
Thank you. And Delmar, what are your thoughts?
Yes, I agree a lot with what Neal is saying. It is important to have a high level of stakeholder engagement. And from my previous comments, I think folks can definitely tell I'm very much for a grassroots approach and making sure grassroots are engaged. But to Neal's point, you do have to bring your municipal partners, your corporate partners, your utilities, and even those that are advocating for solutions that we don't agree with. We need to engage them in the conversation because oftentimes, as Neal eloquently mentioned, if you start to understand the pain points, there are communities that are losing fossil fuel plants, and then you unwrap the onion a little bit and you see that's the foundation that pays for their school system in a small community. So rather than just being whole hog trying to go after everybody, what you have to do is to start having dialogue and conversation about how do we replace those lost jobs and opportunities with jobs and opportunities in the clean energy economy, and what do we need to do as a state, as a community, to replace those lost tax revenues so that their school systems are healthy. One of the approaches that we've tried to take on is we've created a coalition, and the Illinois Clean Jobs Coalition really brings together a collaboration of community organizers, environmental groups, union groups, and we work closely with our utility partners and our state government. So what I would encourage people to do is to really one, as Neal said, definitely do your research, learn about what the issues are. And then what I would encourage the community groups to do, which we found very helpful, was we had these sessions called Listen, Lead, and Share, where we openly talked about these issues. And then from that, we then put together our policy positions and then move those forward legislatively. So it goes from us being advocating for something to actually putting solutions on paper that we can sit down and talk with our leaders. And I would lastly say, Carla, that there is a role for young people. So for all the students that are in this discussion, please engage. We had a session with the Illinois Governor's Working Group this week, and one of the lead speakers in that was one of the youngest members of our coalition. And she very passionately talked about why these climate issues are important and then led the discussion on solutions. So this is a very important role for all of us. And I'll end where I started, which is the great comment that Neal made, is we need to make sure we bring all of the stakeholders to the table and then begin to work toward win-win solutions that are good for our planet and good for our communities.
Thank you so much to you both. And in those last comments, I heard some very hopeful outlooks for continued and expanded dialogue and for that youth voice that's really pushing along that dialogue. So I want to say a sincere thank you to Neal Hawkins and Delmar Gillis. What a pleasure to be with you today at the Midwest Climate Conference. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Carla.
Well, thank you so much, Carla. What a phenomenal discussion. So everyone from where you sit, please join me in thanking Carla, Delmar, and Neal for the phenomenal remarks and discussion. So we're always only able to just scratch the surface in the keynote session and the keynote panel. So please stick around and continue the discussion in the workshops. Before we shift to the workshops, I have a couple of housekeeping items and reminders. First, if you'd like to change or add a workshop to your registration, send an email to climatesummit@wustl.edu, and you'll find that email address at the bottom of the conference homepage. Next, we encourage you to use social media throughout the series and tag your posts with hashtag Midwest Climate Summit. Our next session is taking place Friday, November 6th, again, starting at 10 a.m. Central, running till noon. The keynote speaker is Daniel Wildcat, the founder of the Indigenous Peoples Climate Change Working Group. His talk will focus on building new partnerships, finding common ground for successful climate action. So a really nice tie to where we ended the session today. The Student Systems Conference is taking place that same afternoon, Friday, November 6th, from 1 p.m. until 3:30 p.m. Central. If you're a student or you're someone who works with students, we encourage you to participate. Please also be sure to check out the Climate Stories contest. I want to share that the top 3 winners in each of the submission categories will receive cash awards of up to $1,500. Students throughout the Midwest are eligible to participate. This will be a phenomenal way for us to bring student voices and arts and creativity into this discussion. Details are available on the website. With that, it's time to transition to the workshops. The links to access the workshops are located below your video viewer, and the password for all of the workshops is climate20, all lowercase. So the word climate, no space, and then the number 20. The password will be displayed on the closing slides in just a moment. Please be aware that the session today will end within the workshops. And with that, I want to thank again our keynote panel, Carla, Delmar, and Neal. We're so grateful you're with us today, and enjoy the workshops.